Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Stephen Ferguson. Stephen is a former Marine Staff Sergeant, serial entrepreneur, and a college dropout. Stephen is passionate about using business to drive change, and he's founded 5 companies and is working on a mission-driven project connecting veterans with service dogs through coffee sales. Stephen, thanks. Thank you so much for taking time to chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Krish. I appreciate it.
There's, the topic that you had recommended is awesome. So I can hardly wait to get started. I know there's 2 or 3 different topics. We'll just get started and then kind of see where the conversation takes us, and then we can go from there. But before we actually get into the topic, Stephen, if you could give a brief introduction about yourself to our audience, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so as Krish said, my name is Stephen Ferguson. I'm a retired Marine Staff Sergeant. I spent 9.5 years in the United States Marine Corps as an infantry Marine, and I transitioned out of the Marine Corps in 2019 and jumped straight into entrepreneurship, founding my first company in real estate. Um, And then the pandemic hit, everything slowed down, transitioned into a new company in financing of real estate. Um, Went on to found a real estate development project up here in Boise, Idaho, and then my most recent project, which I'm currently working on, is Honor Guard Coffee. It's been an incredible journey getting here. It's been a bit challenging with the highs and the lows that come with being an entrepreneur and a founder. But I wouldn't change it for the world.
Thanks, Stephen. That's awesome. I'm going to do a screen share just to make sure I got to the right. Tell me if this is you for sure. So this is your company, right?
Yes, sir. That's us.
I know you get that. Thanks for that introduction. But now that I've pulled up that page, if you could talk a little bit about your current work, your company, and what you do, and just a tiny bit, and then we can get deeper into the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm a really big fan of using business as a mechanism for positive social change. And one of the things that this project is, it's about getting service dogs for veterans, which is close to my heart because I have a service dog who has completely transformed my life. And it was a challenge to get that service dog. I actually ultimately ended up having to learn how to train dogs and train her myself, which is not exactly easy to do when you're going through a mental health crisis. So what I am doing, the purpose behind this company, is to pay for service dogs for veterans. We're roasting specialty grade coffee, shipping it straight to folks' door. It's roasted to order, and a quarter of the profits are going to getting veterans paired with service dogs.
That's awesome. Stephen, even before we continue, thank you for your service. Sorry I didn't mention that earlier, but
Uh,
we'll talk about your business and what you currently actually do. So I just did a quick screen share so folks can look up Honor God Coffee, and we'll include the links on the podcast as well, including the link to your profile on LinkedIn. So we were, the few items that you had mentioned there was integrating a social mission into a business model. Now that is very important, and you mentioned that's the core of what you're trying to do here. So if you could just talk a little bit about, I think you kind of alluded and you mentioned that a bit, but just in some more detail, if you will, what that means to you, sort of integrating that social mission into a business model, some of the, perhaps even some of the challenges you've run into along the way in accomplishing that essentially.
Yeah. So what having a social mission within a company means to me is I believe that business should not only prioritize profit, but have a high priority for people as well. The environment, you know, people, its employees, its stakeholders, everybody. And so with that, I try and develop my companies so that they they have a component to them that does give back. It's more than just a profit making machine. And, challenges that come with that, especially early phase startups or bootstraps, you know, you're donating a percentage of your profits and using that for some sort of a social cause, that's cash that's not in your own bank account to be used to grow the business. So that is a huge challenge, especially in the early startup phase, like where Honor Guard is right now. Arguably, a lot of that cash could be used to grow the business, but a little sliver of it has to go, or a quarter of it ends up going to the cause.
Amazing, right? Now let's get into the second part of that, which is bootstrapping a startup with limited resources. In my conversation with founders, a number of them over the last many months, since we launched the podcast, which was initially a solo technical podcast, but now we talk about various aspects of running a business. Everybody, there are a number of things that are common when it comes to challenges between founders, but there are things that are not necessarily, there are those items that are unique as well. So perhaps we can start out with some of those. I mean, the idea behind the business, like why did you decide to do what it is that you're doing right now? Why this business in particular? I guess let's start with those, and then I can add my questions.
Yeah, so I don't have a good answer to why coffee. To be perfectly honest, I just sort of stumbled upon a supplier of really great coffee that I liked, and I happened to be looking for a new venture at the time, and I wanted to pair that particular venture with getting veterans paired with service dogs. The thing being sold was never really what was important. It was always about what would be the best mechanism to support veterans and get them service dogs. And after weighing several different options, apparel having been one of them, I settled on coffee as being the best route for this particular cause.
Makes sense. And then, what about some of the initial challenges that you face? You mentioned bootstrapping a startup with limited resources. What were, there were things probably that went smoothly, and maybe there were other things that did not go just as smoothly as you might have expected. So, if you could share some of those things that went much better than you expected, maybe things that went just as good as you thought they would, and things that didn't go quite well that you had to do different things to get around or get past it.
Yeah, so when you're bootstrapping and you have limited resources, there's a million things that have to be done and they're all fighting for resources. So one of the challenges as a CEO of a startup is to prioritize, okay, what of the many slew of things that are, vying for resources right now is today's priority? What's going to move the needle the most? And then prioritizing what little resources you have into that, and then working your way down the line from there. And also, remembering that everything is cumulative. So even if you're only taking one small step towards your goal, it is still a step. And, repeat that for a year and you look back from how far you came, and you're not going to recognize the where you're at.
Right. Okay. And then as you got started with the business, right? What were some of the initial things that you did? Again, for somebody who's watching this or listening to the podcast, who's who aspires to become an entrepreneur, right, Stephen? These are things that typically help because everybody's journey is different. It's unique. So if you could share some the initial days of you thinking through, hey, here's what I want to do, how do I get started, or here's how I want to get started. What were some of the things that you had absolute clarity over, and what were some other things that you had to actually do more research, find out, and learn more before you actually got started with the business?
So when I go to start a venture, I lay out an in-depth plan based off of everything that I know at that moment, and then from that plan, I'm usually able to identify pieces of information that I need to understand or have more knowledge on, maybe do some more research on, and develop that plan even further. So for somebody who's looking to start a business for the first time, my recommendation would definitely be to plan. Expect to spend a good couple of months at least minimum working on this plan, getting it down on paper, because you could think that you're gonna remember it, but the truth is you'll have a great idea and then it's gonna disappear into the void at some point in time. So get it down on paper. And I find myself personally that helps to kind of flesh out the plan as a whole. You know, it might bring into your awareness something that you didn't even really realize was something you need to consider. So that would be
Makes
my
sense, right?
recommendation for the first step is definitely have a plan in place.
And the plan, like in terms of when you're coming up with this plan, were there some tools that you used that helped you? Like, how did you verbalize this plan? I mean, like if you could share, I mean, it could be maybe you put that on even it doesn't have to be a fancy tool, but whether specific tools that you use that helped you actually move a bit faster.
There was, and I think the plan was called Live Plan. I want to say it was one of Intuit's products, and it was essentially a
Okay.
business planning tool. I've used that, and it's really great for what it does. You know, it's got financial projections in there. It's got guidance and prompts and the whole nine. My most recent tool that I use is ChatGPT, and I mean everybody's using that nowadays. You know, but I use that in the development and uh, the planning process because you ask it for a question to help you develop the plan, and it'll ask you a question, and honestly it's asked me questions in facets of my business that I hadn't really even considered yet.
Great points there, right? So let's say step one is coming up with an idea. But now, typically all of us have a lot of ideas, right? But not all of them can see the light of day because they're not viable. And sometimes, I think of like 10 things every morning. By the end of the day, nine of those don't actually make any sense. And I'm wondering, why did I even think of them in the first place? So, when you started with your idea, did you have a number of ideas that you try to flesh out before you pick the one that made the most sense? Or were you just lucky where you thought of one and that ended up being the business?
No, I worked through a couple of different iterations before I landed on this particular business model. I did know that I wanted to do an e-commerce platform, and I knew that I wanted to pair it with service dogs as a social mission. But what I didn't know was what the company would actually be. There was a period in time where it was actually an apparel company, but after some research into the whole thing, I decided that that wasn't necessarily the right direction for this company. Um, and so I want to say, yeah, that was so two iterations of what the company would actually be. It started as apparel, and then it transformed into coffee, and coffee is what really stuck and what made the most sense in the plan going forward.
Okay, makes sense. And then when you had two and you went with one, like what you said you had to do the the planning, writing it down, and visualizing a lot of this. Did the idea that fell through, was it because of numbers, like from a business standpoint, like it did not make sense, or it was not viable, or there was too much money needed? What were some reasons where one became better than the other that you chose to go with that one?
Yeah, it was honestly it was the industry itself. So both markets are saturated, so they're difficult to enter and break into. But the great thing about coffee is that it's going through, especially direct to consumer. It's going through a um, there's massive growth in the direct to consumer coffee industry right now as a whole, and there's a movement from lower grade coffee into specialty grade coffee, whereas apparel there was not quite the same amount of growth. So I was looking at the industry as a whole when I made that decision to move into to specialty grade coffee.
Okay. Now that you decided you're going to get into a business, you're going to become an entrepreneur, you're going to actually sell coffee. Uh, now, I run a startup based out of the DC metro area, but it's a software startup, right? We have B2B and B2C products, so there's no physical component to it per se. Your case, it's a combination of the two, right? You have an e-commerce site and you actually have the physical product. So if you could explain, not just to me, to our audience as well, because a lot of us are sometimes building software, but we don't have any other component to it. But in your case, it's interesting because you have two parts to this puzzle. If you could just tell us which comes more naturally to you, maybe both do. But if not, what comes more naturally to you, and where you have to make an extra effort, a conscious effort, so you it's something you have to learn as you keep going.
Yeah, so I am not a technical wizard by any stretch of the imagination. So for me, the website, the e-commerce, the web store was the most personally challenging part of this whole thing. Um, and the development of the back end stuff, the business systems, like the meat and potatoes, the bones and the muscles of the business, if you will. That is all the parts that come most naturally to me. So developing the system to take the orders that come in, get the coffee roasted appropriately, get it shipped off to the consumer in a timely fashion. That stuff, that is where I thrive. That is the thing that I love doing the most. The website, I had to hire somebody for that. Not gonna lie.
Okay, no worries. Yep. So, which all of us have a particular skill, and then we build a business. We spend time in things we know, and we learn things that we don't know, and it's quite natural, right? It's just that what each of us does or is more comfortable with is just varies. But the problem, I can tell you personally speaking, right, Stephen, I've just been building software for longer than I sometimes want to admit. So that comes a little bit more naturally than other aspects of the business, like sales, for instance. As we start, when after we've gone live, one of the things that we've had to consciously learn as personally and as a team is, great, you build this. Now, selling it is a different problem altogether. What are the things that we need to learn when it comes to sales? And I talk to people to who sales comes naturally. So, so I completely understand there. Let's talk about the things that come naturally, and then we'll go to the more difficult aspects of the things that you have to learn. So, and again, excuse my ignorance here, I've never sold a physical product before, so I'm going to make a bunch of assumptions, some of which may or may not make any sense. So you're selling coffee, you're selling it online. At least there's one way you're selling it is online. Is there also a physical store presence, or is all of your sale made online through the website?
So we do occasionally go to, in-person events, expos, and what have you, and it's a great growth mechanism for the business. But we don't have any retail store presence. If somebody meets us at an expo and they buy our coffee and they want to buy more, they have to go to the website. And the reason behind that is that if we get our coffee, say, into a couple of different retail stores, well, these retail stores are likely to start competing on price against us, whittling our own profit, and competing on price against us too. And it's a pretty quick way for a brand which is not established yet to put itself out of business. So we only have
No, make the
we only
website, right?
have
Makes sense, right?
yes.
So that's your primary way of actually, even if you go to these gatherings and events, you're able to socialize your product and your business, but the actual sale happens through the website. So the pieces of this puzzle you actually need, and I'm going to trivialize this just because I don't understand that a whole lot. So please correct me if I'm wrong. You have to have the product, which is coffee, and you have a way to sell it, which is your online presence, the e-commerce website. So where, if you could just someone who's watching this, who's building who's doing things that are similar, right? Maybe not coffee, maybe they have another e-commerce business, for instance. What are some of the things that make this business? In other words, you need to procure coffee, right? So I presume you have a supplier. There's some place you're going to have to buy this coffee, and then maybe there is some packaging that you have to do. And once you do the packaging, you have to store this coffee and take care of it from an inventory standpoint. And then you have published that on the website, so people can make the purchase. And once they make the purchase, you have to have a distribution pipeline, right? The order is placed, you need to fulfill that order, it's sent out, and maybe they have questions, and there's customer support, right? I know this is, I'm just talking about it as a consumer, as somebody who's never sold this. Tell me what I may have missed there, or if I've missed quoted something in that list. What if first of all, is that list correct? And if that is not inaccurate, did I miss something there?
No, that's exactly right. You hit just about everything. We have to procure the coffee from the farmer itself. We have to roast the coffee. We have to ship the coffee. And we've got to store the green coffee while we wait to roast, because we roast it when it's ordered, to maintain freshness. It's it's a rather complicated pipeline. And I mean, you'd think it's just
Yeah,
coffee.
I
You'd think
can.
it'd be easy.
No, no, I know. Having running a business, I know everything that seems easy. It's only easy until you don't do it. The moment you start doing something, it becomes a whole lot harder, right? Just the way life works. That's why I want to dig into each of, if you if that makes sense, just get into the specifics of some of this. So you have to start with procuring. Again, I'm asking this because there are entrepreneurs watching this podcast and learning. So whatever you share here, Stephen, it's going to be quite useful, even if they're not going to be in the business of coffee. It's still, a lot of what you're going to share here is going to be quite applicable to a lot of businesses, as you can imagine, right? So now you're procuring coffee. Do you have expertise in coffee beans? Like, does Steven understand coffee? Or if that's not necessarily the case, at least not when you started, how do you go about being able to tell which bean is better than the other?
So that's a great question. And I wish I knew enough about coffee to say that. I had to partner with somebody that had the expertise to do that. I couldn't go to a plantation and tell you if these beans are going to be good or not. So I partnered with somebody who does know that. They travel the world, go to different farms, small farms, in Bali, in Costa Rica, Peru. We've got some in Mexico that are coming in, and they're the ones that are actually procuring the green beans for us. And they're the ones that know that, hey, this lot of coffee is going to be super high quality. We think you should go with this lot of coffee. Maybe not really reaching the specialty grade criteria. So
Okay.
from somebody's
I,
perspective who is his learning how to do this, if you don't have the knowledge base, it's absolutely crucial to find an expert who does, because as a CEO and as a founder, it's not necessarily you knowing everything and being an expert in everything, but it's vital to know who you can call, the experts you can call to give you the answers.
so here's my question. Now, some of us, we get into, we do something for a period of time. We find an interest, we build an expertise to an extent possible. Expertise is very loosely used term. I'm very careful about it. But let's say you gather some experience about the things that you do, and then you end up launching a business that is very related to what you had done in the past. In your case, this is a new business, right? It's not like you come from a world of coffee, from what I understand. This is something new that you wanted to start a business, and you're like, I explored a few different options, that this seemed to make the most sense, and let me go with this. That's very different from, say, my background in starting the business, and each of it comes with its own set of challenges. Given the fact that you were not necessarily familiar with coffee to the extent that you probably are now, at least when you started the business, Stephen, what were some things that you were wary of, right? Like, cautious about or concerned about because you just didn't know enough about it? What were some of those things?
Honestly, I dove into this particular project with probably less caution than I should have. Where I sit now, based off of the information I had, I definitely should have been a bit more cautious, but I dove in head first, and kind of figured it out trial by fire. This was my first e-commerce, retail, and coffee all rolled into one, and I have to say I was quite shocked by a lot of the different things that came up. Um, Not the least of which, marketing is completely different than my previous ventures were, having to rely mostly on digital marketing and having to rely on storytelling as opposed to just sending, direct mail or network marketing in order to find clients back then, my previous ventures. So there's a whole slew of things that really came out that I think I wished I
No,
had given it a little bit
okay, I
more
get that,
thought
right?
and
So
maybe a little bit more caution.
we're going to get to marketing in a second, but let me go back to what I was going to ask earlier, which is, you procure the coffee and you mentioned there's a number of steps, right? You said roasting, and there's many things that happen before, and you have to package it before it becomes available, and then you have to store it. So what are some of the tools that you're using to facilitate this? Like, how do you, I mean, is some part of it automated? If it's not, how much human or manual intervention is needed? And but in general, if you could just share the tools that you're possibly using to manage this pipeline, because there's a number of things that needs to happen repetitively, right? You need to
Hmm.
procure, somebody's going there to check out different coffee beans. They have to recommend some, and you have a process by which one or more of it makes it into the list of coffee that Steven and the company wants to sell. And then you have to go, that goes through a process, gets packaged, and now is sitting in some warehouse somewhere ready to be shipped. How do you manage that piece of the puzzle? Like, do you use tools? If so, what kind of tools do you use?
Yeah, so we we use a lot more manpower now than what we're aiming to do in the future. My goal is to automate as much as we possibly can. Right now, everything is managed with we have an inventory tracking system that tracks what we have, how much we have left, and I use that to gauge when I need to reorder my beans and what have you. Um, the orders come in automated. The coffee roaster will get the order, roast that one up, stick it in a box, slap the shipping label, which is printed off automatically, and set it to the side in the warehouse ready for pickup. So there's a decent amount of automation, but there is also a human component that remains necessary for now and quite likely fairly far into the future as well.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about. So now you have that. You have a process. You mentioned some of it is automated, but more is going to be in future. There's a lot of manual intervention needed at this point of time. You have the coffee, sitting somewhere ready to be shipped. Now, when the order is placed, people, go online, make the, purchase, and then you ship it. That's before I go deeper into these things, Stephen, is there? I know I trivialized that, but is there more to this that I may have missed here? Are there any pieces of this puzzle that I've sort of skipped through?
No, I think you have just about everything set there.
Okay, so then let's go to. I want to go to marketing, but before that, I want to go to some of the challenges in running this business on a daily basis. What are some of the challenges that you run into, both from a technical standpoint, perhaps the e-commerce side of things, and maybe the tools you're using. Maybe they report inventory correctly or incorrectly, or you run into some challenges there. If you could speak to the challenges that you run into from a technical standpoint and from a non-technical standpoint, both would actually be quite interesting for us to hear about.
Yeah. So from a technical standpoint, not being somebody that has any particular background in software or coding, web development, or anything like that, the technical challenge is really the web platform, which as e-commerce, that's the like Walmart building equivalent of what our website is. And so having something that is both converting and appealing to the consumer, the user interface and everything, that's a challenge. And it's something that I work with almost every day, looking at user analytics and seeing where we can tweak the website to make it better. As far as our other technical software, it's all kind of plug, play, and set it and forget it. It's worked. It hasn't given us a problem, and I'll address it if it comes up. Uh, and then the other non-technical challenges, which I think are fairly common for a lot of businesses, is where do you find your growth, managing customer service as that comes through, and day-to-day management issues of having employees.
Okay, so let's talk about the technical side quickly, right? So you mentioned that this is not your background, so that there is some things that you have to make an extra bit of effort to keep going. Let me ask, this is an e-commerce site, and given the day and age right now, right, Stephen, you shouldn't have, I'm presuming, you don't have to build the site from scratch. In other words, there are platforms and tools and templates that you can sort of leverage where you go use the e-commerce template and you're like, all you're trying to do is add the images, the price, the description, the title, and that not there should be nothing more that you would have to do is one way to go about. Or you could have a homegrown system to managing this? Before I presume which way you went, can you tell us which way you went with your website?
So I actually went both directions. I started with something that was custom built. It didn't particularly work out in the timeline that I was hoping for, so I did pivot into using a pre-built Shopify theme and customizing it to fit the brand. There are some challenges in there, being that they are pre-built. They're not necessarily customized to your particular industry or for your particular goal in mind when it comes to what the conversion might look like. And so there is a certain amount of customization and tweaking that does have to go into that.
Okay, so that makes sense. So two parts to it, right? So you said you start out with building something that's homegrown, and then you move to say, using a platform and templates and whatnot. Was there any particular reason that you actually start out not using these pre-existing platforms? Did you want to build something ground up for a different reason, uh, or did you discover that these existed after you had made an initial time investment into building your own platform?
So we actually started on a different e-commerce platform. We're currently on Shopify, and we started with BigCommerce, and at the time, using BigCommerce seemed like the right move because we had more freedom to create whatever we really wanted it to be. But as I got deeper into the development cycle, a lot of issues started to arise, and I started to look for solutions elsewhere. As I um, looked into moving to the Shopify platform, a lot of the issues that we were having with BigCommerce and a custom build were completely null and void. They weren't even issues if we moved to Shopify and used one of these theme stores. So we made the decision to move from the custom build over to the theme store for sake of economics and ease of use. And there were some other back end issues that we were having with BigCommerce too that were resolved by moving over to Shopify.
And the idea behind these companies, the reason Shopify is big, and is because when you're in the business of selling a product, that's where your focus should ideally be, right? The rest of it is almost noise, if you will, because you're facilitating the sale, uh, then nothing more than that. So the idea behind at least these companies providing these templates, I mean, we don't provide website templates, but we do provide APIs and other things for businesses to get started and build web or mobile applications, complex apps, if you will, much quicker, right? At least that's one of the products that we do at Snowpal. But taking the example of Shopify that you mentioned, if the idea is they give you everything you need, so you should have to worry about nothing else but just procuring coffee, packaging it, and being focused on coffee. But you did mention there are technical challenges. So are you, if you could speak to some of them, despite using the tool, do you still find yourself, you and your team, do you find yourselves in a situation where you're like, I'm not exactly sure how to do this, or is that a problem of the past?
So there are some relatively minor issues, and it stems from these themes. You're given this limited box to work in. So if there's a solution that sits right outside the box, then it becomes a little bit of a challenge to overcome or find a solution to it. And that's the challenge with working with these themes is you
They
are
are
somewhat
limited, right? They're
limited.
limited, and
Yes, exactly.
no, I get that, but only let me ask you this: if your objective is to sell coffee online, and you're trying to, speak to, actually, let me step back. What is your unique selling proposition, Stephen, for the coffee? You know what I mean? There is coffee. There is a lot of coffee in the world. Before I go to my actual question, this is a natural question that your customers and prospects are going to ask you. Why should I be buying coffee here? So in your mind, what are some of your unique selling propositions?
So in my mind, we have really one that stands above and beyond the rest, and that's that we're donating a quarter of our profits to getting veterans paired with service dogs. That is really the selling feature of this coffee. It is roast to order. It's specialty grade. It's very high quality. It's the only stuff that I'm drinking nowadays, and that is a selling point in and of itself. But I feel personally that that's something that is expected. If somebody's buying specialty grade coffee, yes, it should be roasted freshly. It should be sent straight to your door. It should be convenient. So our primary reason why one might choose Honor Guard coffee over another brand is because we're trying to pair veterans with service dogs.
Okay, so the you mentioned being able to custom. The reason I asked that is you mentioned customization and why these templates are limiting. How does why is that even a problem? In other words, you have a way to publish your coffee, add that to your e-commerce website, and people are able to find it and make the purchase. So my question is, why do you need to customize the layout? Is it because you also want to have some form of differentiation between how the pages look? And if so, why should it look different? Does that play a role in the end user, the customer making that final decision as to whether or not they should buy coffee from Honor God?
So what we're finding right now is that there is some based on how the layout is and the user interface as they're scrolling through the web page and reading about the company, seeing the product. It tends to either have people bounce off of off the page, or ideally convert to a sale. And that's where we're running into the issues with the themes, is that we're a little bit limited on how we can alter the layout and in the ability to test the alterations in the layout. And that's where the issue is coming from. Not so much sorry, I forgot what
No, okay,
I
no,
was going to say
no,
there.
that's fine. No, I get what you're trying to say there, but let me go back to the question. Given that these companies are providing these templates, and I presume there's a number of templates that you could choose from and do some levels of customization. The type of customization you're looking for, that you're not able to do it simply because these companies are in the business of doing this, and they've done hopefully their due diligence in figuring out what the community generally needs. Uh, do you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to do something different, but it's really not something you need to do differently? In other words, it is not something that might be necessary, but you as a company and a founder and the team somehow believes that that is needed, but that's not actually needed. And I ask this because it happens to all of us. Sometimes, as founders, we focus on a certain feature, certain way of doing things because we recognize that as a problem, but sometimes we generalize the scope of that problem, scope of magnitude of the problem, and come to believe that everybody acknowledge that that is a problem, and it's here is how that needs to be resolved. So I'm just taking that and sort of extrapolating that to this situation here. Do you, and it's just me thinking out aloud, in those situations, Stephen, is it Stephen and the team sort of wanting to customize it more than what is probably needed? Like, would you find, I mean, if you were in that situation, would you be able to tell that that was not needed? It's just that you may have thought that it was needed in the first place.
That is possible. From the data and the analytics that we've collected, it does seem that we could do some things to improve that. And we are actually we've got a revision underway, and it appears to me, leastwise, not being somebody who's too terribly technically minded, to be an improvement on the current iteration of the website. But it is possible that we have zeroed in on this as being an issue that needs to be solved, when the reality is that perhaps it's good in its current state.
Makes sense. And let's talk about marketing a little bit. Now you have coffee. You start a company that sells coffee. You know how to procure it, how to go through the process, how to package it, how to put that online and then sell it, and then complete from a fulfillment standpoint. but you need to market the coffee, right? You mentioned you go to certain events and gatherings, but if you could speak a bit more to some of those challenges, what do you do by way of marketing? Actually, I had a recent chat with somebody who was a marketing chief marketing officer, and I learned plenty about things about marketing that I had not necessarily known prior to that conversation. So if you could just speak to your marketing process, your challenges, things that things that work for you, things you're trying to improve, that'd be good actually.
Yeah. So right now, our most effective marketing is honestly just getting to those events and talking to people and shaking hands and telling people about the company and getting a bag of coffee in their hand to take home and try. And that is bar none the best marketing we have. The conversion rate is like uh, something around the lines of about 20%, which is in the coffee world incredible. Um, and we also have, we've got a digital marketing presence, which is it is challenging to say the least. The conversion rate there is right now about 1.5%, which is why we're looking to optimize the website. Um, it's specifically to in attempt to raise that digital marketing conversion rate. We have ads going out on the Meta platforms right now. We have static ads and video ads. We actually find that the video ads work far better than the static ads do. And we also have email and SMS marketing where, we're able to talk to people that sign up for the newsletter, talk to them directly and market to them from there, as well as update them on the company and where we're at with the mission.
That's that's a good set of things that you're doing there. So who is your ideal customer?
So
I mean,
our
anyone who
ideal
likes to drink coffee for sure, but beyond that, yeah.
So our ideal customer, what we found, and we found this through going over the data of our customer base, and what we found is that our best customer seems to be women that are aged 50 to 65. They actually make up the bulk of our customer base at this particular moment in time.
But how did you arrive at that demographic? When you start from selling coffee, you could sell coffee to any just about anybody, right? So how did you go from there? Did you target a certain demographic to begin with, or did it organically happen? So you could just speak a bit more to how that what the process was to arrive at the demographic, because for all of us, no matter what we do, arriving at that ideal customer profile, that's it's a challenge. First, understanding who that should be is a big enough challenge, but then once you do kind of know who that should be, trying to find ways to get to that market is the next set of challenges. So how did you arrive at that demographic?
So this actually it came to us really, and this came through doing in person events and shaking hands, getting the coffee in people's hands, and then on the reorders when people started coming back to the website to order more coffee, they create their customer profile, and we could see who they were, and what we found was that I mean, this very particular demographic makes is it's something like 7 to 1 for the rest of the customer base. So they very quickly made themselves known that they're really interested in the coffee, and so that's how we found that. And kind of discovered that this is probably the demographic we should be.
Stephen, this is very interesting. So I'm going to try to dig a little bit deeper into this. So when you started selling, you did not have this particular demographic in mind, right? You were just trying to sell coffee. So let's go to that initial stages. Before you arrived at this, and it happened, like you said, it happened organically. Who were you trying to target? Did you have like an ideal customer profile in mind when you went out to socialize your product?
So when we initially began, my initial thoughts on what our ideal customer would be somebody who is aged 35 or older, somewhat maybe 35 to about 55, maybe 60. Um, Somebody who had a disposable income, because the coffee, if you're drinking expensive specialty grade coffee, then you need the disposable income to get there. I didn't think that the college kids were going to be buying a $20 bag of coffee, and I know this because I wasn't buying a $20 bag of coffee.
Right.
I was buying the $3 for a gallon Folgers, and so that was about as narrow as I was able to get it at that particular time. I did kind of have it in my mind that maybe business owners or other founders, other C-suite executives, maybe they would be interested in the coffee. I kind of found rather quickly that they were not. And it turned out to be just, the aunt that's got a nephew that's in the Marine Corps, and she enjoys knitting. Well, she also loves supporting Honor Guard Coffee, because at some point her nephew's no longer going to be in the Marine Corps, and maybe he's going to need a service dog. And by buying this coffee, she can support her nephew somewhat down the road.
So how much of that's a lovely explanation. So when you go to when you're trying to connect with this demographic, is there must, even though it's good coffee, it's specialty coffee, and that person is drinking coffee, what kind of helps close that deal, if you will? Is it the mission, the purpose? It's not because Steven's just running another coffee company, but this is a coffee company with a social mission. Uh, does that play a role? If so, how much role do you think that plays in comparison to the coffee and the bean itself?
Yeah. So what really helps to close that loop, so to speak, is the mission. The Specialty Coffee Association did a survey of the things that people take into consideration and how important they are when deciding what brand of coffee to purchase. And number one across the board, every time they've run this survey, and I think it carries a weight of something like 87% of the reason why they choose a brand is that the brand supports a cause that they themselves support. And so it needs to be a cause that they can identify with, that they support. And if you meet that requirement, then you're more likely than not to get the sale.
That's very interesting because I think this is very key. I think for everybody to understand, while the business changes, while the mission could change, maybe not all businesses end up having a social mission. But whatever be the reason, there is a particular one or two reasons, or a set of reasons why somebody wants to do business with someone else, with another company, and that could be beyond the product and the service that company brings to the table. I think that is sometimes lost in translation. Stevens, I want to get your thoughts on that, because as a business owner, we almost, I think a lot of us almost always think about the product, the service. If you're opening a restaurant, you're thinking about the cuisine, the food, the dining experience, a number of other things. But sometimes, maybe I don't know this how this example ports over at least gracefully to restaurants, but there could be a scenario, where a hypothetical scenario, where somebody is able to bring customers, hungry diners, into a restaurant, not because of the cuisine, not because of the location, not because of the service, but because of something else that the founder or founders may not have thought about when they got started. I mean, does that make sense? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, at least?
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring this up, because to me, the quality of the coffee was number one. So I am already aberrant from the majority of folks that go out there and buy coffee. So this I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, no, no. So
Um,
you're just going to explain why, when you're trying to make a sale of a product or a service, why people sometimes want to purchase that product or the service, not necessarily for the product or the service itself, but for other reasons that we as founders may not have necessarily thought about.
Yes. This is something that I often forget. And it really comes back to, your brand messaging, and being consistent with that, and really finding out what works and what is important for your brand. So for us, our brand message focuses around um, who we are, what we're doing, and what our give back and our purpose is. So really, the coffee is secondary for us. Yes, it's really good coffee, but the whole focus is that we are out here trying to save veterans' lives by getting them service dogs. And you can support that mission by buying the coffee, which is really good, but it's all about the mission. And that's what it comes down to.
So I think that's very important for everybody to know. And again, this, when you hear of examples, you sometimes, at least me, you make an effort to have it put over 100% to your problem, but that's never the case because your problem is different, your product is different, your service is different, your business is different. But the hope is to learn the ideology, if you will, behind how another business owner is able to be successful, so you can sort of take that understanding and adapt that, make necessary changes and be apply that to your business and your service, so you could be just as successful as well, right? So that's why I was asking some of those things. So I know we talked about most of the items I had in mind. To as we come to the top of the hour here, Stephen, one of the other things is the journey from being an employee to becoming a founder is one of the things that you had mentioned. Uh, what are some things that you expected when you became a founder, that you were like, you know what, things are going to be a whole lot easier after I become a founder, after I became a founder, and then it did not turn out to be the case? And what were some things that were a pleasant surprise that you did not expect, but that was nice that you actually got it after becoming a founder?
Um, one of the things that I was most looking forward to when I became a founder was the freedom to, build my day as I saw fit, which is amazing. I love it. It's still one of my favorite things, but it's a double-edged sword because now, you're on the hook for your productivity. You have to design your day and prioritize your work tasks in order to move ahead, because if you don't, nobody's going to. And that's it's
So
uh,
discipline, right? This, and whether
yeah,
some things were like, what were there? Can you think of anything that you were pleasantly surprised after becoming a founder? Were there things that became easier that they weren't just as easy before you became a founder?
over time, it has gotten easier to overcome challenges and problems. One of the biggest challenges that I had to overcome was learning how to solve problems that I didn't know how to solve when I got the problem. And once I figured out how to do that, it actually it became substantially easier. And it, from where I sit now, looking back to how far I've come, I'm pleasantly surprised with my own ability to look at a problem and now find a solution for it, even if I have no
Lovely,
idea,
right?
zero idea how to solve this problem at 8 a.m. By noon, I've figured out at least a step a way ahead. It might end up not being that great of a solution, but I've learned something at that point, can reattack the problem from a new angle. And if you repeat those steps, relentlessly, eventually you will overcome that problem. You'll find the solution to your problems.
Yeah, I think you said it very well, because the sense of independence, because you have to become independent, because you don't have to, especially if you're a startup, you're limited in resources and time and money and whatnot. So you don't have like 15 people to do 30 things, right? You have four people to do like 400 things. So you're put in a position where you have to sort of swim to survive, and you pick up these skills that you would have otherwise not had the opportunity to learn to begin with. That makes complete sense to me. So I know I have a customary question that I ask to all my guests, which is outside this the main topic of conversation. But before we get there, uh, any questions that you have for me, Steve?
Shoot, off the top of my head, I don't think so.
Okay, no worries if you don't, but if you do now or later, you're more than happy. You can hit me up, and I'm happy to, share my thoughts on, if it's technical, there is a decent chance that I might be able to, we might be able to provide the assistance that you do need there. So the question I was going to ask you that's not related to the topic of conversation is simply, what is your comfort food? Like, what do you, if you're going to dinner, what are you looking to eat?
Man, this is a tough one because I love so many different kinds of food. I think I'll go with sushi though. I love me a good sushi roll, get a little sake along the side and, have at it.
You're the second one actually. I talked to another founder of VB8, which is a vector database, as Bob, and he mentioned, if my memory serves me right, that he loved. He's in Netherlands. He mentioned his favorite was Japanese sushi in particular. I mean, sushi is from Japan, but he was very. If I remember, he specifically mentioned that. Um, I've never been to Idaho. Hopefully one day, because I live in the suburbs of Washington D.C. and I know Idaho is like beautiful. So for the audience, our audience is predominantly in the US, but there are decent number of people who are outside the country as well, in Europe and Africa and South Asia. If you have to explain Idaho, people can find it on the map. How would you explain Idaho, and where do you exactly live in Idaho, Stephen?
I live about 40 minutes just outside of the capital city of Boise. In Idaho,
Okay.
the southern portion of Idaho, it's all high desert. It's very arid. There's a big old river, the Snake River, running through it. And then up in the Panhandle, it's all it's mountains, it's wooded, it's just absolutely gorgeous country. And there's an awful lot of hot springs in Idaho. So you roll up or down any of these rivers up into the mountains, you're liable as not to find one. We've got we have loads of gems.
This
If
whole
you're
area is like, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that, it's, I asked a question in particular because it's one of, this part of the country is one I've not yet been to. And we've always looked to go to Montana and Utah and Colorado. From what I've seen, it just looks absolutely brilliant, like beautiful, which is why I was like, what, it'll be nice to know. I didn't realize it was oh my god, it's very close to, like, I know people in Oregon. I didn't realize it was that close. Wow. Okay. So any suggestions for people who want to visit? What are some things, one or two things that you think that we should definitely not miss there, Stephen?
So Coeur d'Alene up north in the Panhandle is stunning. It's a fairly good sized city, but it's a city that doesn't feel like a city. It feels like a small town. The lake there
How
is
do you spell
beautiful.
it?
Oh, that's a good question.
Wait, let me see. Yeah,
Coeur.
let's see. Oh, this one here. Wow. Okay. That seems like a difficult one to pronounce. You're talking
Yeah.
about this one, right? This
So
city?
it's French, and I don't know what it means, but that is it. That's Coeur d'Alene right there. Absolutely
Wow.
gorgeous.
Okay.
You gotta go. I would recommend it more than Boise, to be perfectly honest. So that's up north. And I mean, God, there's so many beautiful things out here. Where do you even start? We've got Craters of the Moon, which is in southern Idaho. It's basically a giant lava field. It looks like the moon, to be honest. There's all
Wow,
kinds of
amazing. I was just trying to pick up one of the places I'm reasonably familiar with. And okay, it's about 400 miles or 300 miles from, like, Bellevue, Washington. This is amazing. Yep. So I can, even without being there, this is one of the parts of the country I would highly recommend, because I've been meaning to get there. I watched a Robert Redford movie when I was a kid. The Horse Whisperer. I don't know if you've seen that one. I believe it was shot in Montana, and I think since I watched it, like, it was decades ago, I've been meaning to go there, but the tickets to Montana are never cheap. It's always expensive to fly
yeah.
out that way. This is awesome. Stephen, I think this was great. Just to learn about you, your company, and the mission. Uh, any closing comments before we call this wraps?
Um, yeah, Montana's beautiful. Visit Bozeman.
Anything, not just about that, about anything else that you want to tell us before we close?
Uh,
Or are we good?
No, I think I've covered just about everything.
Awesome. Thanks for again, Stephen. Thanks for your time, folks. That we had a chat with Stephen Ferguson. Stephen is a Marine Staff Sergeant and a serial entrepreneur. We looked at Stephen's company, Honor God Coffee. Talked about the business, both the product and then the e-commerce site to some extent. So definitely check out, buy your coffee there. We'll include links to your company and to your profile, Stephen. With that, I'm just gonna say, gonna call it wraps here. But Steven, just hang on for a couple of seconds after I hit stop, just so the recording uploads. Yeah. So, folks, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.